Welcome, folks, to the first of the Oregon Safe Routes to School webinars. I think we're going to start in about 2 minutes to give people a little bit more time to log in. All right, well, welcome everyone to the Oregon Safe Routes to School webinar series. This is Hannah Day-Kapell from Alta Planning and Design, and I'm excited to be sharing the first of our series about equity and safe routes to school communications. And with me are Corrine and Xiong from City of Portland. And so please bear with us. This is the first time that we've been doing this, and the GoToWebinar is a little bit of a new process for us, but I think there is a chat box in terms of if you have some questions, please feel free to put your question in the chat or under the questions, and we will have time for a Q&A at the end or throughout the presentation. So, Corrine, since you're doing the slides for me, will you go to the next slide, please? Yep, as I said, this is Hannah Day-Kapell. I'm a planning principal with Alta Planning and Design, and I'm joined by Corrine and Xiong from the City of Portland Bureau of Transportation Safe Routes to School program. So next slide. We wanted to start so I'm so glad that everyone's able to join us today. It's really awesome to have, it looks like we have about 45 people on this. We were excited about this topic, knowing that this is a really unique time right now for everyone. People are trying to change communications, talking about what makes sense, what makes sense to even talk to our safe routes to school constituents and families about during this time of social distancing. And many safe routes to school practitioners are also really engaged in developing communications and outreach materials that will be used in the fall when things are hopefully back to normal. So we want to take this opportunity to highlight some of the best practices and share some of our thoughts about messaging and communication. We wanted to start out, though, by really thinking about asking a question that we should be asking every time that we're embarking on a new project in any role, but especially in Safe Routes to School. Who benefits the most? Who is able to engage in the work that we're doing? Who's able to easily participate in walking and biking education, in walking to school or home from school? And how are we designing our programs in ways that can best include as many people as possible? So today we're going to highlight some ideas for that around communications. There's some pretty obvious ones about like translating materials into the languages that are spoken in your community. But also we want to introduce some of the nuances and suggestions for how we can do better in this area as we're all endeavoring to continuously improve in this area. We also want to think about, what limits families, especially now during the pandemic. And we want to come to this conversation really recognizing that all of the same inequities that we experience day to day are continue to be true and can be even more difficult. For example, we know that Latinx families can be afraid to leave home during this time as immigration concerns and things that we've seen even before the pandemic are continuing for those communities. And also there are communities where wearing masks can be challenging and fraught, that the recommendation for wearing masks is not the same for all communities. So I'm going to come back at the end of my presentation to some messaging specific to this unique time of social distancing. I certainly don't have all the answers, but I think it's really important to start out with some of the questions and recognizing some of the challenges and limitations for folks. So diving into some of the recommendations we have for copywriting and for actually producing some communications tools. Hopefully this is all pretty unsurprising to folks, but there are some materials that we found really valuable to help us with messaging. It's really important to think about who your audience is. Who are you trying to reach with your communications, and how will you reach them? For any audience, trying to use as much plain language and avoiding long and complicated and jargony words is always valuable. We found there's two URLs on this slide that we found really good places to get resources and support for making sure that our language is more applicable for everyone. It's always a good reminder to use active voice and to sort of take responsibility for things rather than that passive voice. And really thinking about minimizing the copy on your page, using headers to break up chunks of text, and using graphics as much as possible. Even for folks, this is especially true for folks who for whom English may not be their first language. Having graphics can really help with understanding and engagement with materials, but really for everyone, it's more engaging, it's more fun to see materials that have graphics as well. I also want to talk about inclusive language. And so this is really thinking about, I think City of Portland does a really good job of this person first terminology. So rather than saying walkers and bikers, talking about a person who is walking. The table on the slide is from the CDC. They have recommended language for communicating with and about people with disabilities. So especially in the transportation world and then in the disability world, it's really making sure that you have people first language, that you're talking about the people who have these characteristics and not the sort of intrinsic. There's language that is maybe older that we try to avoid now. We also want to think about how pedestrians are not only people using their feet to walk down the road. That the word pedestrian is really intended to be inclusive of folks who use mobility devices. And so thinking about people standing, or not using the word standing necessarily at the corner when we're doing bike ped education. And really thinking about what are the different cues that people use when they're traveling safely throughout the environment, that it's not just about looking. It can be for folks who have low visibility, there are other senses that they bring to traveling. Massachusetts Safe Routes to School, I think, has been a really great example of bringing in person first language and inclusivity into their curriculum. And we like to use the metaphor of thinking of pizza. So pizza is usually a dough with sauce and toppings. We all get to make pizza, but some of us need gluten-free dough, dairy-free cheese, no cheese. We might prefer tomato sauce or pesto or use a different sauce. It's all still pizza, but the idea is that a pedestrian, when they're looking for cues in the environment for whether it's safe to travel, pedestrians are looking for visual and audible or tactile cues, and so they aren't all the same for every person, but they're using this combination that's available to them in order to gauge whether it's safe to cross the street. So it's like a very specific example, but the idea is really thinking about how the language that we use may preference certain ways of engaging with the world, and really trying to avoid or be as, really trying to be as inclusive as possible, to think about what people might need. And really, we recommend normalizing inclusion by just talking about them, recognizing that people are going to need different accommodations or different ways of engaging with safe routes to school programs. And we really recommend putting those front and center, say, for folks who may need adaptive bicycles for participating in bike education, these are the options that are available to you, and what are which ones would you prefer to use? That's kind of a overall considerations for inclusivity. When we're talking about print materials, there's some specific aspects of people that are particularly important to consider, so that if we're trying to be as inclusive as possible in the materials that we're developing, if we're trying to reach the widest array of people, it's really good to think about making the print materials as accessible as possible. At the bottom of this slide, there's a blog post that has really some specific examples. But some of the things to consider are illiteracy and low literacy. We know that there are 32 million people in the United States who can't read, and about 50% of adults can't read above the 8th grade level. So this is very important to keep in mind, and use, less jargony language, and really thinking about that plain text as much as possible. Dyslexia is the most common language-based learning disability that affects reading, writing, and language comprehension. And again, folks who have dyslexia really benefit from having plain and simple language as much as possible. We also know that 22% of people in the United States speak a language other than English at home, and so making sure that materials are available in the languages that the community speaks in, and again, using the more plain language is really beneficial. And then there's a variety of visual impairments that I think sometimes get overlooked when we get excited about flashy graphics and doing things really that are really attractive. But we really do need to think about how do people who have visual impairments see colors and the copy that we use. So some of the recommendations to accommodate folks with visual impairments include using large print, symbols rather than color, and then including explanatory text. And then, for some very important materials, having audio versions can be really beneficial as well. And then a word about fonts. So similarly, we sometimes get excited about using fancy fonts and making really attractive documents. And it is, again, similarly to other things I've talked about, the fonts can really make an impact on how easy it is for folks to be able to read and engage materials. It's of course going to be different if you're producing a poster or a flyer, if it's meant to be read quickly or from a distance. A lawn sign that somebody who's driving might read quickly needs to, of course, have very large text and be very easy to read, versus a report or brochure that somebody might take some time engaging with and studying. So we generally recommend sans serif fonts, and really making sure that your fonts are legible, even the headers that can be more attractive maybe, but making sure that it's not too scripty that can be hard for folks to read. So the next slide is just an example from King County Metro School Pool, which is a Safe Routes to School outreach engagement program in the Seattle region, of this applying some of these concepts of really having inclusive graphical styles, showing members of the community, and keeping the copy simple and straightforward. And this particular image about driving safely in school zones is actually borrowed heavily from a really great document that City of Portland's Safe Routes to School program developed. And this has been translated into, I think, 5 different languages that are used throughout King County. So I also kind of moving on to talk about translation and transcreation. You may have heard the word, you're probably familiar with the word translation. That's the literal transfer of meaning that conveys word for word messages that are generic and comprehensible to all audiences. You may have heard the word transcreation. That's been kind of, I think, gaining in popularity and in interest. The idea of a transcreation is recognizing that literal translation may not actually convey the impact and the meaning of the sentence that you're trying to translate into a different language. Transcreation is really about translating the intent of the word, slogan, or phrase into a different language. It's capturing the essence of the idea and making the target audience believe it was created just for them in their native language. So transcreation is especially important for taglines, slogans, brochures, and headlines. One of the very typical examples in the Safe Routes to School world is walking school bus, which sometimes has been translated as like bus with feet, or something that really doesn't make a lot of sense in another language. And so we really want to make sure that we are translating these Safe Routes to School concepts and all of our work in a way that really engages with populations that we're trying to reach. A couple of different approaches that I wanted to share about transcreation are to make it context and community specific. So thinking about, even if you're, it may seem simple for those of us who are not Spanish speakers to translate something into Spanish, but think about who the community is that you're trying to reach. Are they in areas in the Southeast and in Florida and in the South? May focus on Caribbean Spanish. In California, we use more Chicano and Mexican terminology, so thinking about where the population is from and what kind of language that they use can be really important. One, again, King County Metro up in Seattle gets a cohort of native speakers together and develop a glossary for different that can be used universally among those groups. In terms of the process, we really recommend working with your translator or transcreator to determine the languages and dialects and tone that you're trying to go for your print material. Most of us still need to develop materials in English and get those approved internally with what you're trying to say, but then send them to the translator. And we really recommend identifying keywords or glossary of those terms that can be translated or transcreated in different ways. They'll provide the copy back, usually in Word, or sometimes they'll lay it out for you. And then if you're doing the layout, you can format that, but then we recommend sending it back to the translator to confirm that the formatted document is still accurate. There are definitely different ways that wording can be broken up, so you want to make sure that that is approved by the translator. And it can be really helpful also to have a community member review that document to make sure that it still makes sense to them as well before you're done. So King County Metro has developed a really nice glossary of transcreated terms. This is not currently on their website, but they're working to have it uploaded, so we can share it in the newsletter perhaps down the road. But they have really thought about, so King County Metro is the Seattle Regional Government and Transit operator. So they have developed transcreated glossaries for planning terms as well as transit specific terms. And so we've been working with them on developing ones for Safe Routes to Schools, and we're working on identifying some Safe Routes to School specific glossaries that can be really helpful so that we have consistency in how things are translated and how our Safe Routes terms are discussed throughout the region. My last note on translation is that there's always a debate of should your material be bilingual in and of itself, or should you have separate materials that are English and then Spanish or other languages? The next slide shows an example from El Monte, California, of a walking school bus program that I helped develop. We made the logo itself have the 3 main languages that the community speaks. And then we had so much copy on each poster that we really felt our graphic designers were like, you can't, we can't do these bilingual. It would be much too cluttered. So we developed separate posters. We actually had 3 different languages. And so these were just posted next to each other on the school fence. And in some cases, when we can have less copy, we can do a bilingual material, but that's something that you need to kind of decide at the very beginning of your graphic design process. So for when you're developing the graphic design, to be as inclusive as possible, we really recommend thinking about representing the community, looking at the demographics of who's in your community, and making sure that you're showing people who are represent the community, both racially and ethnically, but also, showing people who use different kinds of mobility devices, and consider cultural dress and hairstyle, to really try to we love making cute images, but really thinking about making sure that they resonate with the community. And again, showing instead of telling as much as possible. So now I want to move on a little bit to being as effective as possible with the communications. This is like scratching the surface of behavioral theory. My colleague Jessica Roberts talks a lot about applying behavioral theory to travel and transportation demand management in particular. I just wanted to share some kind of high level thoughts on this quickly, but I'm happy to follow up afterwards or during the Q&A about this. But in particular, there's 4 areas where we found that applying behavioral theory to safe routes to school communications in particular can be really effective. So the first is the fresh start effect. And this, on the next slide, there is an image from Minnesota Safe Routes to School. They had an intern go through and update all of their outreach template materials based on the behavioral theory. So fresh start, and so these are really awesome materials from our friends in Minnesota. The fresh start effect is basically that people tend to be more motivated to try new things after a symbolic fresh start. So it can be New Year's resolutions or the beginning of the school year, on Mondays, the start of the spring, things like that, where it's like, make a resolution, you're going to make a change. This also applies to an actual fresh start where families who are entering kindergarten, 6th grade, 9th grade, or who recently moved into a district may be setting their transportation behaviors and habits for the rest of the year. So it's really good timing to address them. I think the City of Portland team has done a really great job of focusing on outreach to kindergarten families and those who are new to the district, as well as other families entering new schools. And they have lots of great materials around that. The second concept is social norming, and that's really about making it feel inclusive. It's showing that there's a messenger who's respected and liked and perceived as a peer, and that's going to be more persuasive. And so having parent testimonials, really saying that like this is something that our community does tends to resonate with people, is what the research has shown. So this is a campaign from Kenmore as part of the King County Metro Safe Routes program. It's like, join us for Winter Walk to School Day. Put on your boots and walk with us. It's very inclusive and engaging and makes it feel normal and part of that community's efforts to walk together. The next one is loss aversion, and that is painting the picture that it hurts to have something taken away more than it does to receive something new. So focusing on what you're losing out on by not walking and biking to school. So this is one again from Minnesota that says, don't spend your morning waiting at the drop-off line, get outside. And I think there's a number of messages around safe routes to school that we could maybe employ in this area of loss aversion. And then finally, the last idea is removing friction. And again, this is from our friends in Minnesota. The removing friction is about helping people think through the step-by-step of how are they actually going to engage? How are they going to decide to make the change that we want them to make? And so it helps them think through what step-by-step how they're going to do this. And so this Minnesota example is really nice. They put out, this is a flyer that we kind of chopped up for the slide, but it's it says, what's your plan to walk to school, our family's plan, and then it has these like places where you fill in what their plan is. And it really helps them think through when they have to wake up, what they have to get, the map of what their route's going to be. And it's a really nice way of making it easy for folks to actually like engage and decide that they're going to walk to school. So I feel like there's a lot of pieces here to this, and I'm trying to go relatively quickly. The last thing I want to talk about really quickly is some very specific COVID-related communications and things that we can communicate as safe routes practitioners during our shelter-in-place time. So some of the ideas, and we've been talking to a lot of safe routes practitioners around the country about, what can we be doing during this time? What's safe? What's appropriate? And of course, any messaging needs to be very sensitive to, the amount of pressure and challenge that teachers and district staff and parents and students themselves are all dealing with right now. But some of the things that we feel like we can go ahead and promote are, promoting walking in the neighborhood, encouraging people viewing walking and biking safety videos and activities online. And one thing that we really wanted to highlight is, recognizing that during this time there has been an increase in racism with the Asian population and against the Asian population, I should say. And we found this really great resource that we wanted to share with folks called Teaching Tolerance. There's a link at the bottom of the slide, and they really recommend that we should all communicate about how to address racism head on when people experience it. And they have a 4-step process. So interrupt, pause the conversation if somebody says something that you're uncomfortable with or you feel like is misinformed. Pause the conversation, say that you want to engage with that particular thing that they said. Question to understand why they said what they did. Why do they think that this is the case? And kind of dig a little deeper. Educate to make sure that that person realizes that what they said was hurtful and how it might be stereotyping of populations and how that's wrong and harmful. And then really echoing to reshare and support any sort of anti-racist messaging. So we definitely encourage you all as you're developing materials during to reach out to families during this shelter-in-place time to include a statement about how anti-racist messaging or racist messaging should not be allowed, and some of the ways of dealing with it should people encounter it. So very quickly, I have a couple of examples of some outreach materials that I thought have been really great during this time. The first example is from Sonoma County in California. They developed they, like everyone else, were planning on doing lots of great outreach and education in April and May. They've pivoted that to a green sneaker challenge, which is they've created this bingo page where it has lots of different ideas for activities that students can do walking in their neighborhood or from home. And they have all of these materials that are linked on their website, and they have the families fill out the bingo page, and then they'll get rewards, I think, once we can send rewards to them. But I thought this was a really great roundup of different activities. And then the last thing I wanted to share is from San Mateo County, also in the Bay Area. This is a handout that Alta developed with them. And it's really about, safety tips for walking and biking while social distancing. So some of the typical, follow the rules, walk and bike predictably, but then also like what is 6 feet? And then, reminding people about mid-law crossing. We see a lot of that right now, recognizing that speeding cars are more of an issue than usual. And then also pointing out some fun activities like the bear hunt challenge and things like that. So with that, I will turn it over to our fantastic PBOT team to share some of the things that they're working on locally.
All right, this is Corrine here. Get my sound going and make sure you can hear me. Can you hear me, Hannah?
I can.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all for being here. I'm Corrine Montana from City of Portland Safe Routes to School team, and I'm newer to the team. I joined last June, and I was at PBOT the year before that, doing some work on our planning team, mainly around public involvement. So you'll see some of my past projects featured in my slides as well as Safe Routes examples. So let me get this set up. There we go. So I'm moving through 2 screens here, double slides, notes. So thank you, Hannah, for those great tips and resources. The images shown here on this slide are from a presentation by my teammate Abra McNair. Abra gave a really fun and helpful presentation about Safe Routes communications. She gave the presentation twice at the national conference in Florida and then again at a statewide to-go meeting back in January at Metro. So some of these ideas were covered if you got to see one of those presentations. At PBOT, we use many of the same tools and methods that Hannah shared about, but I have to admit that I learned a lot from Hannah's slides that I didn't already know about. So it's great to get that new information. Some of it's very up to date with the COVID responses. And yeah, as a newer Safe Routes practitioner, I really love the culture of sharing that we have here locally and regionally, statewide. Nationally. So that is a really great thing that we have. And we're still continuing that during this time. For Smart Trips to School, this is our program where we focus on kindergarten and 6th grade students. Students receive an order form in the mail and they choose active transportation materials and incentives. In 6th grade, they have the option to get a hop card loaded with a day pass. And for this program, I wanted to share about it because we use a lot of communications best practices. We basically throw every communications best practice we can at Smart Trips. But I'll name just a few. There are probably more that I'm forgetting. So first, we use the Fresh Start effect. We're sending these out in those transition times. For kindergartners, students are new to school, and for 6th graders, they're transitioning to middle school and becoming more independent. We also use another behavioral science concept called reciprocity. So we're giving something and we're trying to initiate like a giving and receiving relationship with families. So through the incentives, through the order form. And we also provide these materials in 5 languages, and these are sent directly to families by mail based on the language that they speak at home. Thankfully, we have that information for our districts, from our districts, and so we're able to really customize what people receive in the mail. We also add our inclusive visuals. We have these great graphics. You can see at the top above the order form that we use in a lot of different ways in Smart Trips. These are on the envelopes when they receive their packets, but we try to show a lot of different ways of traveling, diversity of people, ages in our materials. And lastly, this the Smart Trips program is really designed for 6th graders to complete on their own. So thinking of copywriting for all people, it's really fun to think of language that will work well for 6th graders. So my next couple examples are videos, which is a little different than print, but an exciting way to share messages. So I'm going to play 2 videos in the next few slides. You should be able to hear and see them, but if not, perhaps Kirsty can put the links in the chat. But they're very short, so if you miss them, you can still keep up with the conversation. So give me one moment. Okay, I hope everyone was able to hear and see that video. So I just wanted to make a few notes about it. First, the video was part of a walking story series for PedPDX, Portland's pedestrian plan. And there are several other videos. You can see the images of the other stories there on the slide. Also, Portland Safe Routes uses this video. We feature it in our 6th grade health unit. And we have this and another video. So we're sharing this with our students and talking about people first language and different ways to get around with 6th grade audiences. And I would say this PedPDX process helped our organization adapt more to the ways people want to talk about walking and rolling for themselves. I like in the video that Myra talks about walking, says she likes walking, and I think each person, has a different preference or different way that they're used to speaking about being a pedestrian or walking, and so the PedPDX process, I think, really helped us just be more adaptable. Each person has a different preference, so we often use pedestrian, but we can be flexible if someone wants to use different language for themselves. So if it's all working fine, I will share one more video. Okay, so getting back on the right screen. That video was created as a direct response to community concerns. You can see on the right on the slide some of the headlines about scooters and Disability Rights Oregon's criticism of the first e-scooter pilot. This was created in partnership, as you saw, Disability Rights Oregon, Rooted in Rights, and the scooter company Lime all collaborated with PBOT to create this video. And what I like about this video is the accessibility features are really put front and center. There are audio descriptions, there's ASL interpretation, and closed captioning, and it all comes together pretty seamlessly. It really stands out for me as a great example. And I also love that this video showcases diverse perspectives and people speaking from their own experiences. I think this makes the safety message more personal, like that messenger, strategy as a behavioral science concept. And then thinking of our current situation with COVID, this makes me wonder how we can invite community members to be the messengers and to highlight their voices on the issues that matter to them, the really pressing, challenging issues that they're facing right now. There may be opportunities for people. Oh, sorry, my screen is not sharing. How about now?
It's working now, thank you.
Great. You didn't miss much, but there's a picture here of the some of the headlines about Disability Rights Oregon and the e-scooters. Yeah, I think this might be a time to think about how community members can be the messengers, and they're facing a lot of challenging issues, and sometimes their voice, their image, their words might pass the message along in a stronger way. So with that, I am going to pass it off to Zhao to share some resources with us to wrap up this webinar.
Okay, hi everybody. Corrine, if you can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. I'm so grateful to be here with you all today. I'd like to start by saying that I hope you're all doing well and are safe and healthy. I'll spend the remaining few minutes of this presentation talking about some of these resources here on the slide that are related to anti-hate and harassment and personal security. While this pandemic is new to us as a collective society, the impacts that Black, Brown, and Indigenous people are facing and currently have been facing are definitely longstanding. It's not new. As Hannah mentioned earlier, we must think about who benefits from our programs and who's at a disadvantage. So some of the equity considerations to keep in mind during COVID are hate and harassment towards Chinese and Asian Americans, the fear of leaving home for essential needs during stay-at-home order for undocumented individuals and families, the targeting of African Americans, particularly related to mask use, and the lack of internet access, multiple devices, and language options to participate in distance learning. So I want to apologize. I only have this one slide, but I'm only talking for a few minutes. So if you do miss something, feel free to put it in the chat and let us know. And also this is being recorded. So if you want to come back and re-listen, that's also an option. So in Portland, our Safe Routes to School team has been passionate about elevating this conversation of hate in public spaces and how we can protect and empower the students that we serve. In supporting community partners such as the Portland United Against Hate Coalition, or PUA for short, and by working with key school district partners, it's very clear to us that Safe Routes programming plays a crucial role in educating and protecting students in personal safety. I presented recently on rethinking personal safety and enforcement at the National Safe Routes Conference. And from our session, it was apparent that many, if not all of us, Safe Routes practitioners are dealing with safety issues and really want to address these concerns for all the communities that we serve. From that session, there was a really strong desire to continue the dialogue of personal safety. So we worked with the National Safe Routes Partnership to create a safety Google group. And please feel free to follow up and let me know or let the national partnership know if you're not already a part of that group and would like to be connected. This forum seeks to collaborate across boundaries and jurisdictions to discuss and share best practices, tools, and resources with all Safe Routes practitioners to address hate incidents in public spaces. And I just want to mention that during COVID-19, we believe that it's critical to move these conversations forward as we're witnessing increasing acts of oppression and xenophobia towards Asians and Asian Americans, as well as the potential for heightened policing of public spaces with really detrimental effects on low-income communities and communities of color. I also want to acknowledge here that underreporting hate and bias crimes, it continues to be a huge issue and passes these crimes off as non-existent. So I have 2 links here. They are Portland and Oregon related. And during this time of social distancing, people are afraid of contracting the virus. So it's kind of been a situation of each person for themselves while out in public. And so while we've seen a surge in hate crimes on Asians and people of color at the national level, we want to recognize that it's still not completely reflective of the actual number, which we can only assume is much higher. I also have a resource link here for APANO, or the Asian Pacific American Network of Oregon. They've drafted a cohesive resource guide for anti-hate activists, victims, and survivors of hate, and I highly encourage you to read through it. And I think that it goes across just being relevant to Portland and Oregon. And I encourage you to share it with your communities. I encourage you to share all of these links with your outgoing communications to increase awareness and really help our impacted communities feel seen and heard. Some of these links on the screen will also be populated in the National Partnerships resource list that's there at the bottom. So please take a look at that and add any resources that you might have. I would like to end by sharing PUA, or Portland United Against Hate, their statement on COVID-19. I think it's powerful and it's a great example of what we can all be sharing out to our communities at this time. We have seen a growing tide of xenophobia, anti-immigrant sentiment, and racism in reaction to this respiratory virus. Misinformation and fear have led to discrimination and xenophobia towards Chinese, American, Asian Americans, people of color, and immigrants. Reports locally, nationally, and globally have indicated reduced patronage for small businesses owned by Asian Americans, in addition to racist comments based on false associations between these communities with respiratory infections such as the novel coronavirus. Xenophobia and racism hurts everyone by creating more fear and anger towards people instead of the disease that is causing the problem. Let's not be led by fear and anxiety, but instead with facts. With any public health issue, the most important thing to do is follow the advice of trusted public health authorities. Viruses know no nationality, and hate or fear won't keep us safe. During any uncertain time, it's critical that the community come together and support each other by getting accurate information and uniting against any form of discrimination. Please continue to report any incidents of bullying, bias, and hate incidents to reporthatepdx.com. Again, that's if you're in Portland. Please consider pointing your communities to this statement by adding it to your website and in your outgoing communications. I just want to reiterate that it's critical at this time that we show up for community and support them in ways that they need, and even if we aren't delivering programs directly. And I think we have some time to move on to questions, if there are any.
Thank you so much, Zhao and Corrine. And this is Hannah again. I was going to mention to folks that I see some raised hands. I'm not entirely sure if you can unmute yourself and ask questions, but if you can go ahead and try that. And if that doesn't work, then please feel free to use the chat box to ask any questions. Oh, it looks like you are now all unmuted.
Muted. Muted.
Did folks with raised hands want to ask questions at this time?
Well, while we're waiting for folks to ask questions, I have a question for you, Zhao. If you can share a little bit about some of the initial topics on the Safe Routes to School Safety Google group, and if there is any sort of initial discussions of topics or areas that that group might be trying to address. I'd be interested in that.
Yes, so this group actually just kicked off earlier this week. So some folks might have seen it if you were at our session at the national conference. We added your email to that, but we're really trying to start off the conversation with the prompts of what are folks experiencing in your community around hate and bias crime and personal safety, especially at this time. We really wanted this space to be a place where folks can continue to have dialogue. So that's kind of where we're starting with. It looks like everyone now has control to unmute. If you can go to the audio section on the control panel.
It looks like so commute options, thank you very much to commute options for organizing and getting the GoToMeeting all up and running and functional. They have recorded the webinar and will be sending it out, and it will also be transcribed for folks who prefer that. And this is, as I mentioned at the beginning, just the first of the Safe Routes to School webinar series. We have another couple coming up on Friday, the 24th of April. Brian Potwin, the Executive Director of Commute Options, will be sharing the Safe Routes to School Action Plan in Oregon. And then in early May, on the 4th, Leanne Ferguson, who's the ODOT Safe Routes to School Infrastructure Manager, will be sharing funding opportunities for Safe Routes to School. So those should be great presentations as well. Did anyone else have any questions or comments? Then we can let you go 5 minutes early. Thanks everybody so much for joining us, and we hope that you are well and stay healthy in this crazy times.
Thank you.
Thanks
everyone.
Thank you.